Let's start with a question. How can we make a fight between superheroes and supervillains, aka capes, interesting? I mean, we've already seen it all. Let's make this question even harder. How can we make a cape fight interesting in text format? In order to appreciate Spider-Man's athleticism, we need to see him leap from building to building. In order to appreciate Superman's strength, we need a good set of speakers so we can hear the impacts and feel them in our bones. Similarly, Kick-Ass's grueling physical pain is communicated to us through his facial expressions. How can a book compare? The answer is deceptively simple: information. Books offer no visuals or sound design, but they can deliver information, and a lot of it. If we want to take advantage of this format, we make the fights about information. Of course, every battle has an element of information to it, specifically asymmetrical information, when different sides of the conflict know different things. But Worm goes beyond the simple battle of wits. Information is the main element around which the fighting takes place. The combatants don't just withhold it from one another. In Worm, giving your opponent information can be a form of attack, as will become abundantly clear when we meet everyone's favorite supervillainess. This is something every reader becomes aware of at some point of the story, but what surprised me is how from the very beginning, from non-cape situations, the conflict is about information. When it comes to relationships, when it comes to everyday life, even the sex scenes have conflict regarding asymmetrical information. This is something we can see from the very first page, from the very first scene, which is where we're going to begin after this short announcement. I'm going to avoid some plot elements on purpose, and I'm going to make some mistakes not on purpose. If you catch me saying something that contradicts what happens in the book, please tell me, either here or on the Reddit thread. Thank you. Also, this is going to be the most writing-focused video in this series, but I don't want it to be a video about how to write. I want it to be a video about how to read. Rational fic encourages us to think about the mechanics and the rules of the world. High literature, a very broad term, encourages us to think about the characters and the symbols, about what's not being said. Worm is a rare example of both, and reading it as such provides an active, intense reading experience. When I read it the first time, I thought whole arcs were kind of boring, but reading it a second time in the way that I'm going to present here, I find that is no longer the case. It is all killer. In this video, I'm going to dive into the first couple of scenes, going as deep as a single line or a single word choice. Not because the first scenes are any better than the rest, but simply because I don't have time to go over everything this way. This type of reading could be applied to each and every chapter in the book, and in my opinion, it should. Let's begin. The first scene. The method we'll use to analyze this scene is the same that we're going to use for the rest of this series. We're going to read this scene from 3 different vantage points, different resolutions, if you will. First, we'll look at the surface, what's actually happening in the scene, what actions people are taking, and what are their motivations. Second, we'll zoom in to examine why the scene works, the functions and mechanisms that play within it, and what affects us emotionally. And third, we'll zoom out to identify parallels, references, foreshadowings, how this scene connects to other scenes within the book and outside of it. Class ended in 5 minutes, and all I could think was, an hour is too long for lunch. So Taylor is in class, worried about how long recess is. Her fingers fidget, her gaze keeps moving from one thing to the next, erratic. She looks over at these 2 girls and describes them. Sophia is athletic, strong, and sexy. Emma is popular, smart, and beautiful. Post-edit notes. I did change the scene here so it's easier to follow. It's not exactly what happens in the book, but the principle is the same. When class finally ends, we are treated to a particularly vivid description of dragged chairs and overlapping conversations. As soon as she can, Taylor skitters away to the bathroom where she hides from the girls, eating her lunch while sitting on the toilet and reading about superheroes. It's an official superhero biography, and Taylor narrates that she suspects it's all made up. Taylor hears voices in the bathroom. She doesn't recognize them, but when somebody knocks on the door, she says occupied, like a total fucking idiot. When they hear her, one of the girls outside calls to the others, "Oh my god, it's Taylor." Then, as one holds the door, the other douses her with fruit juice, staining her bag, which has her textbooks and notebooks and the art project that she spent long hours working on, but now she cannot prove that she's done the work. After the bullies leave, laughing, Taylor stands alone in front of the mirror. She asks two questions. The first is, what the fuck? The second is, what the hell am I supposed to do? Stop for a second to consider what your expectations are, or what your expectation would be if you didn't remember what happened next. What is the natural thing to happen next in a book about superheroes? What does happen next is that bugs, as numerous as the stars in the sky, swarm into the bathroom. She can control them, and they send sensory information to her, which she actively blocks out. They also communicate a desire to defend her, that is, to attack the bullies, and again, she actively needs to stop them. As she says, it would be so easy to just go carry on the school. Let's stop here and analyze what we've seen so far. Resolution 2. Zoom in. Literary tools and emotional effects. Class ended in 5 minutes and all I could think was an hour is too long for lunch. I was scared of reading this part. I actually started this reread at Leviathan and read through the S9 arc. Both of these arcs literally redefine horror. I've read horrible things and went to sleep right after with no problem. But this line, it evokes so much dread. I let a friend of mine who's a teacher read it and it unsettled him. You feel not just that this kid is terrified, but that they're terrified of social life. You feel how isolated she is. You feel how lonely she is, where the things that should be fun no longer are. The first sentence provokes questions. What is Taylor afraid of and how bad is it? Then we start getting hits. Taylor's agitation is not communicated to us through her thoughts, but through her awareness of her own body. When we hear a description of the girl, we know that something is wrong with her relation to them. But what? The screeching of the chairs and the overlapping conversation gives us the feeling of too much information, as if the information is trying to invade Taylor. And why is the biography here? Why is our precious time being wasted over this thing? Several reasons. One is that it shows us that, like us, Taylor likes reading. A second is that it shows us that she's clever enough to know when she's being lied to. And the most important one, in my opinion, is that the war over information is already hammered in as a theme. Taylor wants to know more, and as a counterattack, somebody is giving her false information through this bullshit biography. Did you feel that dread when the bullies tricked Taylor into giving away her information, or when one of the bullies says, "Oh my god, it's Taylor"? Like one predator communicating the location of their prey to the rest of the pack. So why the juice on her backpack? Why not something more painful, like a beating? Why does this actually make this bullying so much worse? And I think the reason is that destroying Taylor's notebooks is destroying the information that she worked hard to accumulate. Destroying her art project is destroying the proof that she would have given another person so that they would know that she's actually done the work. They are interfering with her ability to learn and communicate. Also, they are communicating to her that they can do this thing. Putting juice in somebody's hair is not so bad. This is something that I could imagine that the players of a winning football team might do to one another. But in this context, it singles Taylor out. It signals to her that the bullies can do with her whatever they want. And you get the feeling that the reason that they can do whatever they want is because they are beautiful, which, as you remember, is a form of communication. Human beings are really good at looking at other human beings and telling how good their genes are or how good their health is in general. This is a pretty important element of our lives, sadly. And because the bullies have it, they can do whatever they want. This is what they remind Taylor of. What makes the scene so bad, in my opinion, is that the humiliation is even more unnecessary than normal bullying. Taylor is already defeated. She's already spending her lunch alone on the toilet. She does not need to be humiliated anymore, and yet they seek her out in order to make her day worse. There is a complete lack of fairness to it. The epitome of kicking somebody while they're down. Back to the two questions that Taylor asks. The first is, what the fuck? That's an expression of confusion, of difficulty accepting that the world is the way that it is, that this is something that could happen, not really a question that can be answered. The second is, what the hell am I supposed to do? It's unclear who Taylor is addressing with this, but it is clear that she wants a solution to her problem, or at the very least a way to mitigate the suffering. But the reader knows what the solution is, right? The solution is to get superpowers and then kick the bullies' asses. We've seen Spider-Man, we know how it goes. As if hearing the reader's thoughts, the next thing that the author communicates is that Taylor already has superpowers. That even though Taylor could literally kill her bullies right that very moment, she doesn't. Why? Because people in this world aren't stupid. Do you remember that scene in Sam Raimi's Spider-Man when Tobey Maguire uses his powers to do some cool shit at school? If Tobey had decided to do backflips and punch his bully in the world of Worm, somebody would write it down in a forum, and even before he got to put on his suit, superpowered individuals would be crashing the school to recruit or kill him. If Taylor used her powers in a civilian environment, she would be divulging crucial information. So already we feel like this world is more mature, more tactical. But there's an even better reason not to let Taylor solve all of her problems with her powers. Because in real life, bullying doesn't get solved so easily. For a lot of people, this bullying is refreshing to read about, even cathartic. There's a feeling of like, oh, finally! That may seem confusing. This scene is very upsetting. Why would I find it cathartic? Why would I be glad to read about it? Because it feels real. The realism, of course, isn't in the bugs, it's in the fact that defeating a bully takes more than just firepower. And for people who know this, there's something very disappointing about watching all of Peter Parker's problems vanish the moment he gets ripped. There's something insulting in watching Marty McFly's dad in Back to the Future punch Biff Tannen and just fix the entire timeline. Like, really, Mr. Scriptwriter? Do you really think that's all it would take? For people who have been there, it's not only disappointing, it's kind of condescending. Taylor deals with a situation that can't be solved. That she already has superpowers. The trauma already happened. What I told you about in the last video about being locked in the locker with maggots, we haven't read about it yet, but this already happened in the book's timeline. Not just in the book either. It's based on a true story. According to lore, this happened to a girl in the author's school, either when he was a student or later when he worked as a trauma counselor. I was one of the fools that disregarded this scene as unrealistic. But the bullying is real. It's a thing that happens to people. It was an interesting decision to start the story after the trauma, after the so-called inciting incident. I think the author made this decision because there is no continuity to trauma. A person thinks differently before and after. They narrate the world differently. The size of their amygdala changes. They become a different person and a different character. I'm going back to the surface level for a bit. The last line in this chapter tells us that Emma used to be Taylor's best friend. This is no accident. It feels weird. Everything that came before the trauma seems confusing, incongruous, like someone else's memory. The author himself is very conscious of how different kinds of information affect the reader, a little art form that we like to call writing. Which brings us to the next segment. Resolution 3, zoom out, parallels and references. I'm sure almost all of you recognize one of the books mentioned in this scene, Stephen King's Carrie. In King's novel, Carrie similarly has tampons thrown at her and at some point is locked in a small closet. She goes through what is basically a trigger event and uses the supernatural power that she gains to kill the people that tormented her. Like Taylor, she's faced with a choice. She chooses pain and hate and suffering. Carrie is the second book referenced in this scene. Some of you probably also recognize the first, the Bible, specifically Genesis of the Old Testament. As the bugs swarm into the room, Taylor describes them as numerous as the stars in the sky, which is a quote from Genesis 26:4. This is to remind us that Worm is a book about God, and there's no need to read any more into it, right? Wrong. So, Genesis 26:4. There's a great famine in Canaan, that piece of land that is now called either Israel or Palestine, depending on who you ask. Yitzchak, or Isaac, son of Abraham, is starving, and he hears that things in Egypt, which is formed around a river, are better. He wants to leave, and God says unto him, "Dwell in this land, and I will be with you and bless you. For you and your descendants I will give these lands, and I will make your descendants multiply as the stars in the sky." Isaac is in a difficult situation, and he has an easy out, in this case, to run to Egypt. But God says if he sticks it out, he'll get whatever he wants. This is similar to the slightly better known story of Eov, or Job, which is a devout Jew that does everything as he should, and his life still turns to shit. His struggle is to continue doing what's right. These two literary references conflict. Genesis 26 is about sticking it out even though it's hard, while Carrie is about succumbing to hate and bitterness and revenge. Which is Taylor going to choose? You might think this is a stretch, that I'm reading too much into it, but the Old Testament references are so common in Worm and so on point that at some point they become overwhelmingly convincing. I did not expect to go this hard into the Bible in this analysis, but every time I checked a suspected biblical reference, especially names by the way, it not only pointed to a parallel but enriched and informed the reading. This extends to other books referenced in Worm. Throughout the book, Taylor talks a lot about reading and her love of books, but she almost never mentions book titles. Just like Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse 5, the Bible is never referenced directly. Aside from Carrie, the only real-world book that's mentioned by name is Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit, and that's because it's basically a map to Worm. We'll talk about it in the next video. This sort of analysis is kind of tricky. If you don't know these books, these references don't affect your reading experience. There are, however, references in Worm that allude to elements within the book itself. Let me exemplify with the first line. Class ended in 5 minutes and all I could think was an hour is too long for lunch. This sets the tone of internal conflict. All I could think was means Taylor wants to think about something else and can't. From the midpoint of the first sentence, we are already aware of the most important conflict in this story, between Taylor and herself. Resolving self-conflict, making peace with yourself, that shit is for old people. Taylor is 15, so she does what young people do, which is distract herself with external conflict. The last paragraph of the first chapter is, "I was going to be a superhero. It was what I used to make myself get out of bed on a school day. It was a crazy dream that made things tolerable." Quoting Fred, "She who has a why to live can bear almost any how." And Taylor has a why in the form of superheroism. Let's see how that works for her. Microanalysis, hurting black widows. Taylor goes home, her hair dripping with assorted juices, and there's this feeling that nobody cares, that the people who should care don't even notice. She briefly jokes about killing her bullies, but admits that in truth she'll probably hurt herself before she'll hurt anyone else. This tells us so much about the character, but also touches on a really sensitive subject, the North American school shooter situation. The author reminds us that for every kid that decides to commit mass murder, there are several who are driven to that point and choose not to. These kids will not be saved by taking away the guns, and I feel like the text begs us not to forget about them. Anyway, if the zoom in, zoom out thing isn't really working for you, I think the next example makes it kind of easier to understand. Surface. Taylor gets home where we get to see her control a horde of black widows in order to make herself a spider silk supersuit that's tougher than any fabric that you can buy in a store and can barely be cut through. She talks about the difficulty in working with that specific genus of spider that is very territorial. That is, every time Taylor stops controlling them using her power, they immediately start killing one another. She talks about the experiments that she performed with the bugs and the silk and how she wrote all of the experiments down in a notebook that's now stained with grapefruit juice and wavy with moisture. Now let's zoom in. This use of the spiders already shows how much creativity Taylor has, how much initiative she takes with her power. When I read that she can control bugs, I didn't think about making a spider silk suit. And not just because spiders are not insects. Taylor is smart, but she's also methodical. but the bullying is interfering with her ability to keep being these things. Zoom out. This is something that I completely missed on the first read, but the fact that the Black Widows are territorial and would kill each other is so central to the theme. All throughout the book, we're going to see Taylor struggle to stop useless infighting in order to unite people to pursue a common goal. In this case, she stops the spiders from killing one another in order to achieve a goal that they can't even fathom, making a suit for her. Psst. It's almost like she's a god to them. The name Taylor isn't accidental. It's not just her using her powers in order to weave fabric. A tailor is someone who takes separate strands and weaves them together in formation that takes the chaotic and makes it orderly. Gee, I wonder if her last name also means anything. We can Google Hibbert and find that it is either from the German, meaning bright army or illustrious warrior, or from the French Hibert, like Jacques-René Hibert, a French revolutionary, a proponent of the Reign of Terror, who was put to the guillotine. I guess we're going to find out if that means anything. You might think that these are coincidences, but just like with the Bible references, so many of the names in this book have relevant meanings that at some point you are going to be convinced. It is not a matter of choice. Names are a big deal in the Old Testament. My best friend in elementary school would constantly get in trouble for using the explicit name, which is against one of the 10 commandments. He felt that not being allowed to say the name is a form of subjugation, and he resisted it instinctively. In Genesis, God basically creates the world by naming things like light and darkness, earth and the heavens. Naming people is also a meaningful action. God changes Abram's name to Abraham, adding the letter H, or the letter He, one of the letters of the explicit name, Yehovah. The Babylonian emperors would give the Hebrew kings Babylonian names after conquering them as a sort of subjugation, which makes me feel kind of weird every time I say Abraham instead of Avraham. We're going to see two kinds of naming in Worm. One is when the author names a character in a meaningful way that lets us know something about them, and another is when a character gives a name, sometimes by force, to another character in order to achieve something. I just love this book so much. Like, every time I think about something, every time I apply effort into thinking about why something happened, I get rewarded for it. In a world where most of the stuff that I watch or read, the more I think, I feel like I get punished for thinking. Okay, so now that we're on that mindset, let's see. What about Sophia and Emma? Do their names mean anything? Sophia is Greek for wisdom, but Sophia herself doesn't seem very wise. When I thought of the word wisdom, I thought immediately about William Blake. I like William Blake, just like the author of Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit. And I thought about Proverbs of Hell, my favorite poem, basically the first poem I ever liked, which says, "The wrath of the lion is the wisdom of God." Emma is short for Ermentrud, Germanic for universal or whole, but to me it sounds like the Hebrew word Ima, which means her mother. I wonder if these are going to have like some super deep meaning later on in the story. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go back to the surface and leave the resolutions for a while. Just tell the story as it is. The first fight, Taylor decides to stop procrastinating and go be a superhero, but she wasn't procrastinating. She was being patient and careful with a very dangerous project. For whatever reason, she decides to hurry up her schedule to go out and start her superhero career, even though her spider silk costume isn't quite finished. That is not a trivial detail. That signals to us that Taylor can't wait to be a superhero anymore. She needs to feel both super and heroic. She goes on patrol to see if she can find any petty crimes to stop, which is a staple of the superhero genre. But she doesn't have any mobilizing powers, so she just takes a walk in the bad part of town, the docks. As she walks, the reader just feels how underwhelming it all is. She's just a girl in a costume walking down the street. The only interesting part in her walk is Taylor's socioeconomic analysis of why her town is so ripe with supervillains. An economic crisis caused people to be poor, which means more receptive to being recruited as henchmen. That in turn draws supervillains. An untreated problem causes more problems. With this story's dedication to realism, you kind of expect Taylor to just spend the night walking around and comparing different rehabilitory approaches. Instead, she finds a large number of Asian gang members gearing up for activity. There's a shtick here. The gang members are drawn together from different Asian ethnicities. This is a Silver Age trope. In the old days, when the creators of a comic wanted a gang of East Asian henchmen, they didn't bother picking up which of the East Asian ethnicities they were drawing from. In Worm, the fact that the gang recruits Chinese, Korean, and Vietnamese gang members serves as a crucial hint to the personality of their leader, Lung. When Lung steps into the scene, Taylor is positively spooked. He is a grown man and an experienced criminal. Even without considering his powers, that is a frightening foe for a teenage girl. Taylor sneaks up to listen as Lung addresses his gang members. She can't really hear well, aside from one sentence that stands out. "The children, just shoot. Doesn't matter your aim, just shoot. You see one lying on the ground, shoot the little bitch twice more to be sure." Sounds pretty villainous to me. Taylor realizes that it's up to her to stop Lung and the bad boys from shooting children. She doesn't have a cell phone, and if she left in order to call from a payphone, she might lose too much time. She prepares to attack, and by attack, I mean climb up to the safety of a nearby rooftop and think. Taylor lists off Lung's powers that she's read about in the forums like a fucking nerd. Let's see. Pyrokinesis, the ability to generate and manipulate fire. Regeneration, super strength, and the longer the battle goes on, the bigger he gets? The fact that this power doesn't even have a name tells us something about how new and strange it is. Taylor doesn't wonder what this collection of power tells us about the world. She needs to figure out how to use her own powers to stop this dude now. Here we are presented with the frontman of the book, tactics. The reader is asked, how would you use a swarm of urban North American bugs in order to incapacitate someone with those specific powers? And in a decision that gave me flashbacks from running D&D campaigns to my nephews, Taylor decides to take all of the area's flying bugs, bees, wasps, and even bigger flying bugs that could carry her spiders and fire ants, and send them all directly into Lung's chunk. She notes that she feels a sadistic glee, then a stab of guilt for taking pleasure in someone else's pain. Then she quiets the guilt by reminding herself that Lung spread death and addiction anywhere he went. And I mean, he was gonna kill those kids, right? To her dismay, he covers himself with fire to kill the bugs. But Taylor is tactical. She's preparing her next attack for the moment in which he turns the fire off. But he doesn't. The author declared his intention for what this book will become, as Taylor wonders, surely he was burning up all of the oxygen in his vicinity. Didn't he need to breathe? What the hell was the fuel source for his fire? And there I was thinking that maybe this dude's name doesn't mean anything. So Lung keeps searching for Taylor, constantly blasting fire on himself and growing to a degree that it will be even easier for him to kill her if he does find her. The helpless Taylor realizes that she should leave now before he grows even more. She makes a single step, seemingly silently, and Lung turns right for her. It turns out that he has super hearing. Let's zoom in and out real quick. The way that Taylor thinks about these things is super engaging. It feels like the way I would think, though in reality I'd probably think something more like, oh my god, I don't want to die. And because Taylor actually thinks, when she does make a mistake, it's an interesting, worthy mistake. If you can call it a mistake at all, Taylor didn't know about Lung's ability to acquire information. And now he knows where she is. Again, notice the main vehicle for progress here. Still comparing to Spider-Man, instead of going out and just suddenly have Taylor become a triumphant hero, she's put on the costume and instantly lost hard. And that makes me feel like this is way more real, as if the world itself isn't going easy on her, just like in the first scene when we found out that the powers don't really solve anything. Speaking of similarities, let's zoom out and notice the parallels between the scenes. Taylor has voluntarily made her a sound, and now her pursuers know where she is, just like in the first scene. Not only is she losing, she's losing in the exact same way that she did to the Buddhists at school, and now she's helpless, waiting to see what kind of punishment Lung is going to inflict upon her. The difference is that after being injected with a huge amount of venom right into his Johnson, Lung is probably going to do something worse and pour some soda over her hair. Back to the surface. Lung climbs over the edge of the building faster than Taylor could even think to escape, and is at that point transformed to a colossus covered in metal scales. It's really clear that Taylor has no chance, but she still goes over her inventory one item at a time, methodically, and picks out the item that is the least likely to be useless. The pepper spray she took with her just in case. She sprays once, missing completely, and shoots a second time, getting Lung in the face and hurting him. More than hurting him, blinding him. He can't see her now. And so in order to deny any more information from him, as he lashes out with fire, she doesn't move or make any sound even when he hits her. That is the only thing that she can do, and she does it. Quick zoom in. This is great for two reasons. One is that Taylor keeps trying. This would have been really unbearable if Taylor would have just given up. Taylor's tenacity, the fact that even in this super dire situation, she just picks up the best option and goes with it, isn't exactly relatable, but it really makes you root for her, if you believe it. I felt like there was something missing in Taylor's narration, like a consideration that maybe she's going to die over this stupid mistake. Second is the fact that the pepper spray works. There's a moment of confusion there, right? Lung is resistant to fire, so shouldn't he be resistant to the burning sensation? Now, we can talk about how capsaicin, the chemical that causes spiciness, evolved specifically to affect mammals and not birds. That is, it's not about the heat itself, but about a specific chemical receptor. But you don't have to know about the evolution of capsaicin in order to enjoy this scene. What makes it fun, what makes it cool, is that moment of confusion and surprise. You think that because Lung's power protects him from fire, it will also protect him from a burning sensation, but you realize that is not the case. His power is more specific. It protects him from the fire that he generates, and that is all you know for now. When people talk about science, they usually talk about the knowledge that we acquired through the use of science. But science is a method to acquire knowledge, and using it usually feels like this. I mean, it's usually less violent depending on your supervisor, but the feeling of building a better model of reality is the feeling of constantly being surprised. One reader told me that the first tenth of the book is his favorite part, specifically for this reason. Unsurprisingly, that same reader is also a successful scientist. He pointed out that this decision by the author to keep the reader confused instead of providing and resolving everything is what got him hooked in the first place. This has been a little intense. Let's stop for a moment and talk about something a little lighter. Sadism. Daredevil is a show that I like. The characters, the dilemmas they're faced with, the action, the drama. Good stuff. Because I like it, I'm going to use it to show how much Worm outclasses something that is already pretty good. There's a scene where Daredevil is interrogating this dude, and one of the things he says is how much he enjoys causing him pain, which made sense to me. I believe people should find a hobby that they enjoy. Rosario Dawson is there voyeuring, and after he drops the dude into a trash dump or something, she confronts him. She tells him, and the audience, that he obviously doesn't enjoy hurting people because he's a good person. Taylor, though? Fuck that self-righteous shit. Which brings us to the game that we're going to play for each and every character. It's called Trusting Interpretation and Mistrusting Interpretation, or Trust and Distrust, in which we'll try to interpret the character's motives from these two different perspectives. Starting with Taylor, why is she mutilating Lung's junk? The trusting interpretation is that this is simply the best way to incapacitate a regenerator. Their brutality comes from necessity, and necessity alone. Taylor just does what has to be done. For the kids, the distrusting interpretation is that she just wants to hurt someone. She did say that she enjoys it, and from the little bit we've seen about her life, we can imagine she has a lot of pent-up rage she needs to vent somehow. Which one sounds more convincing to you? Both interpretations can exist at the same time, and sometimes one of them is going to be way more convincing than the other. But for now, we can give Taylor the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she did just do it to save the children. What about her friends, though? Meeting the Undersiders and how to make supervillain friends. Taylor is now in her lowest point. She realizes that she wasn't prepared for this fight. Lung is very close, very strong, and very angry. And we can assume that once he heals, he's going to tear Taylor into shreds. And he would have gotten away with it too if he weren't knocked off the roof by something that looks like a crossbreed between a tiger and a lizard. We meet Bitch, who controls these creatures with a sort of superpowered whistle. Gru, who's covered in darkness and doesn't let us see any detail about who he is. Regent, that we simply don't know anything about his powers. And Tattletale, that in a reverse of the trend, from the start gives us a taste of how much she knows. Gru asks Taylor if she's okay, but she doesn't answer. She doesn't want to exchange information with the villains and become associated with them. The reason she's not introducing herself isn't because she's hurt, Tattletale says, not even looking. It's because she's shy. I just love this so much. The reader is simply dying to know what her power is, what all of their powers are. This type of tension is the heart of how Wildbow constructs a scene. There is something that we don't know, but we know that we don't know it, and we're dying to find out. What we do know about these villains, though, is that they're normal teenagers. They joke, they smack each other on the back of the head, they talk like teenagers. Gru explains that Lung was about to direct a pincer attack on them, but because of Taylor's interference, they can handle each of the elements separately. As Lung is getting destroyed by Bitch's creatures, Gru asks her what she did to him, and she tells him, and then the villains basically high-five her. The theme of kicking someone while they're down is a prominent one. We're seeing it now with Lung getting beaten by the Undersiders after being hurt by Taylor. We've seen it before with Taylor's bullying, and we're going to see it later on much bigger scales. Notice how this theme is played upon. The Undersiders find Taylor just as she's about to be, at the very least, hurt by Lung, but instead of letting him or helping him, they help her. They thank her and congratulate her, saying how nice it is to have a new villain in town and maybe they could work together sometime. But now they have to go, because the heroes are about to arrive and she should probably leave too. But Taylor doesn't. She's glad the supervillains didn't hurt her, but she doesn't want to be one of them. She waits for the hero to arrive, and Armsmaster does. He's a tinker, meaning that he doesn't have any power aside from an intuitive understanding on how to make technology. Kind of like Iron Man, but with a super important distinction. He's not a genius in the rest of his life. One day he was a normal person, and the next he just had an intuitive understanding on how to make a halberd that cuts things on a nanometric scale, or condense a computer into his helmet so it could predict the actions of his enemies. Bobby Fischer is known for saying that he hates being called a chess genius. He insisted that he is a general genius that just happens to focus on chess. Armsmaster is the opposite. The only thing that he's good at is making technology, specifically condensing existing technology into something small. Zoom out. This is a metaphor for how Wildbow sees the writing process, I think, that every single story element serves multiple purposes and nothing goes to waste, making everything hyper-efficient. We're going to see this. So Armsmaster binds Lung up in some thingamajig and goes to talk to Taylor. Taylor thinks she's cool. She's impressed that a real superhero is talking to her, though not like an equal. The villains did talk to her like equal, but Armsmaster doesn't trust her. She tells him that the Undersiders knew that he was coming, and by gifting him information, she wins his trust. Then something strange happened. He asks her who should take credit for the capture. He said that if she takes credit, then she's making herself vulnerable for revenge from other members in Lung's gang. But if he takes credit, then maybe he could protect her. Do we trust him? The trusting interpretation is that he really cares about Taylor's safety. The mistrusting interpretation is that he wants the credit for himself. It's hard to imagine someone like Iron Man, who is an egotistical asshole canonically, taking credit over someone else's work. Wildbow really captures the feeling when you're a kid talking to a grown-up and realizing that the grown-up is doing something that they shouldn't. It's way more subtle than just making Superman a fascist or a sociopath. He's just a little corrupt. In a way that's better for Taylor. He now owes her 1, even 2. 1 for raising his status among the heroes, and 2 for giving him tactical information about the Undersiders. Is this what Telltale aimed for? Another quick game of guess the motive. At this point, we don't know anything about Tattletale except that she knows things. Like that the heroes were on their way, and she told Taylor that. Why? The trusting interpretation is that she genuinely thought Taylor is a bad guy and a possible ally. That seems like a mistake for people without the power of knowing things. The mistrusting interpretation is that she wanted Taylor to have that information to give to Armsmaster, because there was something she was getting out of it. She sacrificed her group's tactical advantage for a specific goal, but what? Note, again, you can read the book without thinking about these things, and it's still a good book. But this complexity is ripe for the picking. You actually need to do it though. Author Eliezer Yudkowsky, who allegedly made Worm famous by retweeting it after being recommended and liking it, encourages us to notice when we are confused about something and use that as a clue instead of ignoring it. This is great advice for anybody who wants to be less wrong in general, but doubly so for anybody who wants to enjoy Worm. If something doesn't make sense, that always means something. Well, almost always. But if Taylor is confused, she doesn't notice it. She doesn't suspect anything. She comes back home feeling better about her life, but we're not going to see it from her perspective. We're going to see it from the perspective of her father. Danny's interlude and God's POV. We talked about tactics as the frontman of this book, the thing that makes it fun and engaging. Now it's time to talk about the real hero of this book, not Taylor and not her father either. What do we know about her father at this point? The word dad has been mentioned twice, once for the pepper spray, which was a gift from him, and the second referring to the man's habit of going to bed early and sleeping heavily. The first, let's notice the word gift. A good friend of mine told me that her brother gave her a can of pepper spray for her birthday, which she appreciated because he spent money and time to get it, and also it's something that she might use or at least feel more comfortable to have on her. But there was something so unpleasant about being reminded on her birthday that wherever she goes, somebody might want to hurt her. Everything that Taylor owns as a 15-year-old girl was bought to her by her parents, so the word gift here makes me think about Taylor receiving this little tube of pepper spray on like Christmas and being grateful, but at the same time like realizing that he doesn't know what it feels like. The first time we meet Danny, he's watching TV. It's a History Channel show about the first superhero and how he appeared for the first time over the ocean, heralding the emergence of superpowered individuals. It gives us a natural exposition of the world while simultaneously giving us a feeling of Danny being worried to death about his daughter while trying to distract himself with information that he already had. It was 3:15 in the morning and his daughter Taylor was not in her bedroom. If before we could have mistaken him for uncaring, now we see him as caring so much it makes him sick. Even though Taylor thought he sleeps like a log, he woke up at midnight when she closed the front door and has been up ever since. His mind jumping between two horrifying options. One is that Taylor went out for a run and got attacked, a euphemism for a word that both the father and the author seem to hate using. And another, she's being blackmailed by the bullies. In my quest to understand what makes me love these characters so much, the first element I found is that they try. They keep trying no matter how helpless they seem to be. And Danny is so helpless. And his helplessness again stems from a lack of information. Ever since the locker incident, Taylor reacted negatively to any attempt from him to understand what was going on. And so he stopped trying to get her to tell. And still, he tries his best to construct an image of the events in his mind. And he fails more than he even knows. Whatever had been going on had been mean, persistent, and threatening enough that Emma, Taylor's closest friend for years, had stopped spending time with her. One of the author's most impressive feats, I think, is dropping everything that he knows about the world, forgetting everything, so that he could write from the diminished perspective of a single character. In the words of Rachel, the poetess, only of myself could I tell. My world is as narrow as an ant's. He feels impotent, his word, not mine. And this helplessness of his, it wins me over. He painfully resists the urge to call Taylor's mom. We don't know where she is, we don't know what happened, only that every day he wants to call her and doesn't. Where is she? What happened? Almost every scene in Worm is built like a puzzle with clues, provoking more questions with every piece of information that it gives. We don't know what happened to her, but we do know that the last time Danny saw her, he lost his temper with her. A single defeat in a lifelong battle against the rage that he inherited from his father. And he's not talking about genetics either. He's talking about witnessing his father's behavior and learning it. In his attempt to prevent Taylor from learning the same thing, he did his best to never let her witness him in rage, and again failed. Taylor has never seen him in rage, but she has heard him twice. The question comes naturally: has Taylor inherited that rage from him? Have we seen it in the way she hurt Long, in her yelling at the school mirror? The door closes downstairs, taking Danny away from his musings. There is something awfully touching about the way that he hesitates to go down to check on Taylor, terrified of what he might find. Instead, he worries in silence, until he hears the toaster being put into action, signaling that Taylor is okay. After all, she wouldn't come back home after a night of being attacked to make herself a snack. He relaxes. His daughter is safe. And immediately rage overtakes him. He's furious with Taylor over the worry that she caused him, angry with the world for hurting her, angry at himself for being such an impotent failure. He's barely holding back from going down there and yelling at her right that moment, yelling at her until she tells him what the fuck is going on. This is just one of the most compassionate and realistic depictions of a character that I've ever read. From the way that he's caught up in the rage to how he falls asleep dreaming of the ocean. By the way, why is this here? Dreaming, I mean, this kind of meaningless dreaming, is not found anywhere else in this book. Can we interpret it? Should we? In the book of Daniel, the prophet Daniel, which Danny is short for, is faced with a similar problem. He is brought up in front of the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar and is asked not only to interpret the king's dream, but also tell the king what he dreamed about. That seems kind of unfair. Like our own Danny, he isn't getting a lot of information. We too are given only one clue to Danny's dream: the ocean. In this very scene, we found out that the ocean is where the first superpower individual appeared. I'm going to do a tiny spoiler here and remind you that the name Sion is a mispronunciation of Zion, which is in turn a mispronunciation of Zion, a synonym for Jerusalem. Similarly to how the prophet Daniel is forced to present himself to the Babylonian king in the Babylonian name Belshazzar, so does the first superhero, Zion, addressed by the world with the slightly more palatable Sion. When Danny dreams of the ocean, he dreams about superpowers. Does he subconsciously know that Taylor has superpowers? I don't know. This is kind of a reach. We're going to see better, more concrete examples. Let's talk about something a little more concrete for now. I hate it when people say that a scene needs conflict in order to be interesting. This scene has conflict between different sides of Danny's personality, but we're not really interested in which part of Danny's personality is going to win. He's probably going to stay locked in the struggle for the rest of his life. But the shifting of perspective, learning more about Taylor's situation, about who her father is, about how she is seen from his perspective, it's this shifting that makes it interesting. And Walbo leans into that shift. The next scene is again from the perspective of Taylor, that doesn't have any idea about anything we've seen or heard about her father. When we meet Danny through Taylor's perspective, we know who he is inside, and we know what he knows. When Taylor tells him that she went for a walk last night, he pretends to be surprised, and she believes him. He is better at lying than what she is at detecting it. And that's already an interesting dynamic. The opposite from the trope when it comes to superpowered individuals and their parents, an inversion. This is nice, but the real kicker is that we're seeing this scene from two perspectives at once. Taylor doesn't know that her father is angry with her for leaving in the middle of the night, and Danny doesn't know that Taylor has superpowers and she's actively engaging with them. One scene is Taylor hiding from her father what she actually did, and another is Danny hiding from his daughter how worried he is over the fear that it will only do more damage. What kind of perspectives is Worm written in? The common answer is first person with periodic breaks for third person, But that's not enough for me. When we read this scene from Taylor's perspective, we see Danny lying. We feel his attempt at swallowing his own anger. And because this is shown and not told to us, because we are given the 2 plus 2 and not the 4, this has more of an emotional impact. So we know more than Taylor does. We know more than Danny does. Knowing more than the characters do is usually called dramatic irony. But Worm does something more. Of all the ways Worm is a book about God, this way is probably my favorite. God is the perspective that takes into account all of the perspectives. Quoting oranges are not the only fruit. Perhaps the event has an unassailable truth. God saw it, God knows, but I am not God, and so when someone tells me what they heard or saw, I believe them, and I believe their friend who also saw, but not in the same way. And I can put these accounts together, and I will not have a seamless wonder, but a sandwich, laced with mustard of my own. We can't see God's true perspective. We cannot see the truth of the events themselves. They can't meaningfully be described to us without a person functioning as a lens. By putting all of the lenses together, we get as close as we get to God. I'm going to call the perspective in Worm God's POV, but in reality it's a God-adjacent POV. And I know some of you are going to claim that this is something that happens in any book that has several perspectives, but I don't think that's true. I think this goes much deeper in Worm, so much deeper as to become something else entirely. There will be times when the characters will know things that we don't. There will be many unreliable narrators. They will lie to us and we will have no choice but to believe them, just like they have no choice but to believe themselves. This is a perspective that, as we'll see in the future, helps us forgive, which I've heard is a divine thing to do. Quoting Jesus of Nazareth, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do." And this is where the efficiency of the writing comes from. We expand effort to read one scene, but we get 2 or more. So I'm going to keep calling this God's POV for short, and if you don't agree with me, that's okay. But I think we can agree that the intersection of realities is what makes this story what it is. I do mean that in the metaphorical sense, but there is an intersection of literal realities in the story, of different Earths. And I will be as bold as to claim the parallel universes are a symbol, a parallel for different subjective realities. And with that, we finish video number 1. I'm tired. I recently finished reading Worm for the second time, and I have no idea what to do with my life. Let us summarize. We saw how information is put forth as the main weapon, the main battlefield, right from the start, with or without superpowers. We saw how the protagonist is presented through her choices when it comes to information, and how so much of the book is presented to us by the author through hints and clues, like specific references and names. So I'm just about done editing this video, and I really feel like the summary isn't good enough. What we did here wasn't look up the names, it wasn't about looking up biblical stories. What we did here is read, take note of things that stood out, and ask about each one, why is this here? Why was this put here? And that is a very different question from how something works or what it does. The why implies intention. And I ask that you trust that the author had this intention. It's not always going to pan out, just like Job, just like Isaac. Sometimes you're going to put your trust in the creator, and things are still gonna suck. I still think this is the correct way to do this. Why did Taylor bring her notebook to school? Did she want someone to find it and find out that she has superpowers? Why did she attack Lung's genitals and not his eyes? I'm not a biblical scholar, by the way. I'm just a guy who likes puzzles. About half of the biblical stories that I'm going to talk about here, I read for the first time after following a clue in Worm. I do have the advantage of being able to read the Bible in the original Hebrew, but there are a lot of good translations, and anybody can open up a search engine and type in Dinah in the Bible. And you should, because the parallel is amazing. But in order to do that, you need to trust in the author. And trust, by the way, is exactly what we're going to talk about in the next video. We're going to analyze the first 10% of the book, from where we left off all the way to Leviathan, and talk about the side characters, how they complement everything we've talked about so far, but also introduce trust as a problem of information. We're going to talk about how trust is established, broken, and mended, how it is basically the most important resource that a human being has, the absence of which is one of the biggest problems that we're facing today globally. Thank you for watching, and huge thanks to everyone who watched a slightly worse version of this video and told me how I can improve upon it. If you think I could have made this video better and want to tell me how, consider becoming a beta viewer. You'd be able to do just that on the next video, win eternal glory and my undying gratitude. Just leave a comment. Also, if my approach to writing made you curious about my own stories, they're all free and available on my website, which I'm linking here. Specifically, I'm linking to a story that I think that worm readers would especially like. Until next time, keep noting that confusion, you hear?